July 24th, 2018, meeting of the Des Moines Waterworks Board of Trustees. We have a consent agenda before us. Do we have a motion for approval?
So moved.
Second.
Second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Bill, any comments regarding the expenditures in excess of $20,000? Item D?
None.
Okay, thank you. Moving into our public comment period, I see a lot of our staff and our director team here. Do we have any public comment? This is the time if you would want to speak on an agenda item or just to address the board on anything. We always reserve this time for our customers. Moving ahead to item 3A, request for authorization to reimburse the City of Des Moines for the water main relocation for Hubble Avenue reconstruction from East Euclid Avenue to east of East 38th Street. Bill?
Pretty straightforward item for the board's consideration here. This is a major street reconstruction on the east side. Too bad Mark isn't here and is Ragbri bound, because I'm sure he would catch the signal that Hubble from East Euclid to East 38th will be a problem from later this summer all the way through next year and into 2020. As you know, when there's a major street project in particular, or sewer project, there's coordination with us, and there's often relocation of our water mains. In this case, there will be replacement and relocation of about $536,000 in coordination with the city's far larger contract for work that's going to be done as part of their project. So we would ask the board's authorization to move forward with this reimbursement of some $536,000 over the next year and a half to the City of Des Moines in coordination with their major reconstruction of Hubble Avenue.
Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Okay, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Item 3B, Bill?
An interesting item before you here, recommended obviously by staff for a change order. Pretty good map in your materials, but you'll recall discussion last fall about working with Polk County relative to some street work and some complex work going on in the Saylorville water treatment plant area. You may recall it because essentially there was about $400,000 worth of flood protection measures. We were actually raising our access road in coordination with work on behalf of the county, paying for work also associated with that in the public street to essentially prevent or provide greater access into the Saylorville water treatment plant in high flow or flood circumstances. Unrelated, at least in its specifics at the time, but now become very related, is a Polk City project involving taking more water from the Saylorville water treatment plant and moving it towards Polk City. So what we are asking for here in this request for $305,000 plus or minus is a change order to the Polk County project to allow improvements in east-west and north-south water main work there in coordination with the Polk County project, but really aiming towards our longer-term needs in Polk City. Happy to try to answer any questions you may have. I've got four subject matter experts in the room with us here But if you recall, this is the Northwest 66th Street widening project, part of a far larger, more complicated project in the Centerville Water Treatment Plant area. You'll remember seeing some footage of the water main river crossing at the Des Moines River, just downriver from the spillway, a large Polk County project that we are a portion of. We're, with your approval, about to become a larger portion. With that construction open, obviously there's an opportunity for us to do a number of things that go beyond what we had originally believed we would have to do, as we have a better understanding of Polk City's needs.
So I'm looking for a motion to authorize the CEO and general manager to approve a change order for Polk County's Phase 3 of the Northwest 66th Avenue Kempton Bridge Reconstruction Project in the amount of $304,246.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And opposed?
A special thanks to, if I may, to Mike, who's newly in the job that he is now in as a director of, or manager of engineering services. He inherited this project with a pretty complicated series of change orders and decisions that had to be made, and has mastered it very well. Certainly with the able assistance and leadership of Nathan Casey, among others, but pretty complicated one to get thrown right into the middle of, right out of the box. Michael, thank you.
Excellent. Moving along, we have a number of informational items. Planning committee reports.
Okay, I guess on the planning committee, the big item, and I guess the only item, was the gallery. And maybe you could, it was pretty cool.
Happy to jump into it a little bit. Michael actually gave the presentation. It was an excellent one on the history of the gallery and some emerging issues for us. Without oversimplifying Mike's great presentation, supported by a lot of work that Kyle and Jennifer and Ted and Doug Oscarson have also done over the years. The gallery is a centerpiece of our operations. From my vantage, and I know I'll get probably a unanimous number of cringes in the audience, probably our most important single asset. Certainly over time, I think that's the case. Today it'll provide 25-ish, what do we get today out of it, Kyle? 20?
It's about 20 right now.
Our first 20 million gallons of water into the Fluor facilities coming out of the gallery system. We've had it as high as 25 or 26.
Near 30 when it was flooding and stuff.
Amazing. As you know, the groundwater system and the interception through the infiltration gallery was essentially our water source rather than the river until about World War II. But it's 100 years old, and some areas more than 100 years old, and it's had precious little preventative maintenance. So our staff has been very much engaged in the last 2 or 3 years in pieces and parts of preventative maintenance, while still relying on it to provide our first shot at relatively treated water coming into the Fluor plant. You have approved graciously about $600,000 in budget the last couple of years. I'll be asking for something like that again in 2019. We need to continue to better understand our gallery, better appreciate areas where preventative and predictive maintenance can continue to add years to its life cycle. It is critically important, but Mike gave a great overview of it. We will continue to push forward in a number of different levels in protecting the gallery, learning more about it, and looking at opportunities perhaps to even more increase our yield from the gallery, recognizing the need to coordinate also with the park master plan and some other things that at least in theory have been talked about, including the circuit as an example. So a lot of pieces to this, but from a historic standpoint, you may want to look at Mike's presentation. I think the PowerPoint has been sent to each of you. If we missed that, please yell, but that was kind of the centerpiece of the discussion at the planning committee.
I think, again, really the interesting, important thing was it's 100 and some years old,
yes.
And our new radial collector wells that might be 10 years old, we're cleaning already. And this 110-year-old feature is working pretty good.
20 million gallons of water a day is very good, David, you're absolutely correct. But we can no longer take it for granted.
No, but I mean,
that's kind of I think kind of our longer term issue.
I think it kind of shows what it's worth.
Absolutely.
Good. Finance and audit.
Finance and audit, we discussed two things, the cost of service update, which I'll let Peggy and Bill talk about, and then that rolled into a discussion about the cost of regionalization, which is really a financing cost, so they're kind of both finance related, and I don't know how you want to handle that, Bill.
Let me try about a 15-second summary, and Peggy can certainly add additional seconds onto it. I think the kind of two issues came out of the finance and audit discussion. An update on the Raftellus review of our current cost of service. We'll be looking towards making recommendations to you as board members that look to a future-looking cost of service process as opposed to a backward-looking to set future rates process, more intent on future improvements that we think are necessary. But you'll also remember one of the recommendations that will come to you will be to look at peaking rates for wholesale customers, if you will, for those customers that do not exclusively purchase all of their water for us. We have concerns that we are cross-subsidizing, supporting them through other wholesale rates. So you'll hear more about that through the Raftellus study. Also, Peggy and Rick have been involved in a series of discussions about future indebtedness and a regional utilities' impact on Des Moines Waterworks bond ratings in and of itself, but also more significantly perhaps is defeasance limitations on current indebtedness we have that essentially does not allow us simply to walk away from our current obligations by taking, as an example, a loan to be able to refinance, if you will, our existing obligation. A great concern that defeasance itself may be a roadblock in the regional discussions. And I believe each of you have Peggy's summary of that it's also been sent to a number of folks in the regional discussions. Happy to try and answer any questions. Peggy, anything you want to add by way of emphasis there?
Well said.
And I do want to make sure we have this discussion at the board because, Diane, we think we know where you are on this, but there were some discussions that we want to ensure that as we share this information with the others involved in the regional discussions that we are consistent as a board. And so, Graham, do you want to talk a little about that?
Sure.
What we
I mean,
agreed to.
I think that, whether it comes to the, indebtedness issue and how that's handled, I think, the decision was to share information widely with, those who are participating in the discussion, because, I think we need to be aware that the concept of asset transfer has many high hurdles that we may or may not be able to clear, and the real outcome, I think, of the customer moving into customer relations meeting in particular, is that we continue to hold discussions in small groups and large groups and whatever size group we need to figure out alternatives that are out there to cooperation. And so, we continue to figure out that path, and there may be other ways to do that.
So it was agreed at the committee meeting that we wanted to share that information with Jason Munn and certainly with the others that have been involved in the regional discussions, and that has been done. I know from the conversations that I've had with folks, some have said this is very timely, we appreciate knowing this, and others have said, well, we knew there would be some type of bonding and that the new regional entity would need to make accommodations for that. So I think the timing was great for us to decide to go ahead and share that information. I think we also need to, and this kind of gets into, I think, Customer Relations Committee, where we're talking about this peaking. I know one ties to the other committee, but Graham, do you want to roll into customer relations?
They are kind of, these issues are all intertwined. As we look at cost of service and how we're going to set rates in the future, and for those who are listening at home and others, we have had a process of setting rates when it comes, all of our rates, but of kind of looking backwards on usage and how much we've pumped in the past to set rates for the future. And what's being considered is a model that really sets rates based on our budget, on what we expect to spend in the future. So there's kind of a change in thinking, if you will. So along in that discussion, there's some thought about when we talk about wholesale customers, and there is a difference between those who pump some of their own water and those who we provide 100% of their water. Those who pump some of their water rely on us in the driest periods, for lack of a better term. And so when our system is most stressed is when those customers come in looking for water. And should there be a different rate structure for those who peak, or that's what we call that, for those who peak off of us. And so there's some consideration that we figure out how to do that. And, you know, as well, and I think, you know, we had a discussion that if we set a rate that anticipates and calculates a charge for those who peak off us, I would suggest that it's as important to us that we find incentives for those who aren't pumping water to plan for the future. And so I've used it a couple of times now as the example of a city like Ankeny, who's, you know, if you're the mayor of Ankeny, what you want to be able to do is you want to be able to set a budget and anticipate as best you can what your rates are going to be. And we should, that's in our interest too. So if we can provide some sort of an incentive by investing with them, helping them invest, whatever the term is, to plan for storage, for instance, so that in those wetter years they're pumping water and putting it into an ASR or some other storage system that levels out our pumping during those wetter years, and then the water is there and available in a drought year, which is good for all of us. I mean, it's good for Moines Waterworks and as a producer of water to plan for the future, and it should be good for a city of Ankeny or a city that's planning because that water is there and available. And so it potentially could balance out. So I throw that out there as a way to, if one considers a different rate structure for those who peak load off of us as the stick in this scenario, we should consider some sort of carrots for those who are out there planning and working with us to plan and use water wisely in the region. So that's kind of a broad discussion of what we're doing, but kind of outlines why the rethinking of cost of service is important, that we look forward instead of backwards, and that as we also look at how we set rates for wholesale customers, the challenges that we face for those who peak load off of us, and the opportunities we have to plan as a region for those areas that are growing and have needs to, and a real interest in stabilizing their budgets.
And to be real specific on the West Des Moines study, the Beanster and Kim study that recently came into the discussion, and I think we had asked our staff and they put together some of the questions and concerns that they had with the study. This whole peaking off of this comes into play because as the financial analysis was done, correct me if I'm wrong, Bill, but on the Beanster and Kim, it was assuming that they would continue to peak off of us at a much lower rate than what they were able to produce the water, therefore driving their overall cost down. So again, just another reason that we wanted to clearly articulate to our suburban customers that we are looking at a new rate structure. We are looking at trying to do some kind of balance on the production. I would ask our counselor, because I've had a couple of people say in the meantime to me, can you do that legally?
Our contracts uniformly, whether they're wholesale contracts or the total service contracts, contain a rate-making clause that says no class will cross-subsidize another class. And I think the advice of our rate consultants is that in an environment where one customer is a baseload customer, and another customer is primarily a peaking customer. If those rates are equal, that involves an implicit cross-subsidization that would be inappropriate under our contractual mandates. So the short answer is yes, I think a peaking consideration in the rate structure is not only proper, but probably mandated by our contractual undertakings.
Thank you, and I'm sorry to put you on the spot on that, but that has been the question that a couple of people have raised.
But that again, I mean, that to me, when we talk about the carrot scenario where we work with communities to plan for the future so that we're storing water in hopes to be able to meet need in the future, that's how a regional entity should work, so that we're planning for those drought times. That's the incentive we want to provide, and the whole reason we're in the discussions that we are regionally is so that we plan for that natural resource that is water, so that we don't abuse the resource and we make sure that it's available to everybody. So it's all connected. I mean, the reason that we're considering a different rate is because it is so difficult for us to plan when others are out there pumping their own water, planning to build plants, to do those things. It's harder for us to gauge, to plan for the future.
The other thing that ties into the whole customer relations committee, I think we may want to talk about the overall discussion about possible investment. That you brought up at the meeting, that this, if we do not have an asset transfer, we want to be prepared as a board to be able to offer a plan B.
Right.
I think was how you.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't, what plan B and plan C and a plan D, I mean, I don't know what that looks like, but I mean, I think that we're very rapidly approaching a time where we may get to a point where people around that table realize that asset transfer is not a viable option, and so we need to figure out how to do that. And a logical step forward to that is to begin having some discussions with our larger partners, if you will, about how do we move forward. And again, that may be sharing some sort of investments with each other, or creating some sort of an opportunity for them to have a greater voice when it comes to investments and rate making and what have you. And there's been an idea floated for a long time that we could open the Finance and Audit Committee membership to others. We could create a new body that participates. I mean, there's a lot of ways to that, but I think where most of us are or have been in agreement is that we can't unilaterally decide how that's going to happen. We need to sit down and have some sort of negotiations to make sure that we understand what these partners need and are looking for, and then find the best way to do that. And if it's a Finance and Audit Committee, maybe that's great. If it's a new entity or a new body, maybe that's the way to go. I don't know. And to figure out how that goes. I mean, I think that the signal that we continue to send and want to continue to send is that we are not interested in walking away from this discussion. The only thing we're interested in is finding a solution, and we also don't have any preconceived notion of what that solution looks like.
And are open to all thoughts and ideas. And
I mean, we will argue that, I think most of us at this table will argue that we at Des Moines Water Works have operated as a regional entity since day one, but that doesn't mean that the way we operate is the only way forward. We're just interested in figuring out how best to plan for the future, and that comes from deciding when it's time to build a plant, and how it's going to be paid for, and how we're going to do all these things. And the more people that we can have involved in that process, the better off we are as a region.
I realized we kind of went from finance and audit into customer relations.
But it was all kind of related this month. It was all kind
They
of
are.
one topic. I mean, whether you talked about cost of service or these things, it's all the same topic.
Anything else regarding either of those committees?
Stay tuned.
Okay.
I have a couple
Yes.
of questions
Please.
on that.
Yes.
One is on the, the whole issue of setting a new rate for peaking. And when I look at it, it makes sense, but I also know it's a difficult it's a little bit difficult issue for people to understand, you know, isn't water water? What does the timing of when? And so there wasn't much in the report from the consultants, except that we wanted to look at it. So I wondered if we could have a piece worked up that talked about the difference and why it imposes different costs.
And maybe when it imposes it will occur?
Yeah, because again, I think people will look at it and say, well, I don't understand, what are you talking about, what is this about? So I do think that, and you know, just assuming that there's cross-subsidization there, I think we have to show how that happens. So a piece talking about that, I think, would be helpful. I don't know if the consultants put that together or who puts that together.
Well, the consultant would put that together with our assistants. We're some weeks, if not months away from that, weeks probably. And I think they're probably, and perhaps it's part of your concern also, Diane, there are really two pieces to it. One of them, again, is this: we're shifting from a historic view of how rate setting should look at the year's prior experience and its pumpage to set rates forward. We're really looking at truncating that and looking forward. That has its own kind of analytical explanation that's going to be important for all of our customers to understand. And then there is the peaking issue, which really is not a matter of first impression for us, but working with the consultants to articulate that. And frankly, I don't know how that will be structured yet. There may be levels of peaking that are actually looked at
Right.
for different rate structures within that
And
large
I'm not
category.
talking about, I mean, I know there's alternative ways that you can do peaking rates. You can do lowering fixed, increase variables, you can do demand rates, demand charges. So and I'm not talking about, I know that gets into details that
Right.
are probably down the line. I'm just talking about right now an information piece that explains that why customers who take their base load from us are different and impose different costs on us from those who peak off us. Because I think that that's an informational piece, and why there is cross-subsidization
That,
in
that I had suggested to Sue, I haven't had a chance to talk with the rest of you yet about perhaps canceling the August finance meeting, but it may be appropriate for us in the next couple of weeks to try to come up with the kind of narrative structure you're talking about here that might be helpful, and let you
Yeah.
all.
I mean, as we're out there and with other people who fall on one side of that or another, you know, if someone says, well, it looks like you're being punitive in these
That's,
negotiations, you're talking about doing this, and we don't understand why. This is the way it's been for years, and now all of a sudden.
Happy to, is that doable, Peggy, probably for the next finance, and we will uncancel the cancellation. It was kind of tentative in our mind, but you weren't here for the analogy, Diane, but I made the analogy from a power standpoint. Imagine the hottest day of the year when customers do not buy from you historically, but now suddenly they want to buy.
Right.
And that's what we're seeing with some of our peaking customers on
Sure,
the
but
water side.
on the power side, you know, you run your most expensive plants, you layer in and run your most expensive plants on the highest day of the year, and that's where your costs come from. Is it the same on the water side?
There's some analogy to that.
Yeah.
You know, an electron's an electron. The quality of water that comes out of the plants is not fungible in that regard. So there are other issues that come into play for us that make it a little bit different. But the real point is, I think folks understand that if customers are irregular and only come during the high production cost time of the
Right,
year, that
right.
they are acting to the disadvantage of people who are there 365 days a year. And that's what we need to work on in terms of a narrative. We'll be happy to work on that a little bit, bring it back to finance and audit, and go from there, because I do very much agree with you that groundwork is going to be important, because this board has been pretty responsive to the use of the term penalizing. I frankly do not find that to be an accurate view of an
Right,
option that's in fact violated, but nonetheless, you're going to hear penalization or penalty regularly, I'm sure, from some of our putative peak users here, so we'll work on this.
I think it's a great idea, Diane. Thank you for bringing it up, because I think, you know, there's the fairness and the legality of it, which
Right.
could be argued, but then the whole thing falls apart if the communication isn't clear about,
Yeah.
you know, how we got there, so.
Well, I
thanks
know
for that.
enough about cross-subsidization that it is often your perspective. It's just
Right.
whether or not you're.
Absolutely.
Well,
So, but getting those costs and what, you know, I think is a really important, an important thing to put together for all of us to be able to explain and understand.
and to have it prior to the recommendation coming several months from now, I think
Oh,
would be
yeah.
helpful to all of us.
We will not have cost data for you to
No.
be able to rely on for the August
Sure.
14th meeting, but we certainly will be able to
Yeah.
have the structure that you can help us to refine.
And then I think that if we have examples of other cities who have that kind of cost structure in there, or other organizations that do this is not something really novel or, you know, unusual that we're talking about doing.
We'll
here.
work on that through AWWA, which is kind of our
Yeah,
touch point for things across the board. But I think there's some novelty in our business about local rule making and local rate making being pretty unique
yeah,
to individual communities. I think an article that I sent to the board here fairly recently that looked at high income areas in California versus New York and how the rate structure was completely different. Because local source water issues really drive the rate issue more than any other single thing. But we get the structure here that you're asking us to try and draw together by August 14th. There will not be cost data
yeah, and
available to us
I
by then.
absolutely understand that. I just think getting the concept and then the second piece of that, if I can remember.
I'm sorry, I threw you off.
You did throw me off.
You didn't have to admit it quite that easy.
Well, it was in my head and I can't remember where it was now.
We can sure come back and think about it, and we'll come back after we do the next
Okay.
meeting report, so. Let us know. Any other questions on finance and
Oh, I
audit?
know what it is.
Good.
It's on the legal piece of it, that we got the bond counsel opinion on where we are and what we can do. And, I mean, when you read it, it looks like a hard stop to asset transfer, that you just simply can't do that the way it is. But,
You can if you have enough money to defease the bonds. You have to have
sure,
cash.
sure, yeah. Which we're assuming nobody has. But what it didn't say is, were there things that you could do through legislation and other ways that you could structure it?
I don't think so. I don't think legislation could impair the contracts that are in force.
I mean, are people going to say, you know, well, yes, this, but there are solutions to dealing with that and.
Fair enough, and I think that was part of the philosophy from Sue in sending out
Sure.
our concerns. If there
Sure,
are
if
ideas
they've
there,
got
we would
some
love
ideas.
to, we would love to hear
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
But right now, I think your characterization, there's a hard stop, unless you have cash availability, is certainly the conclusion that I think that we've drawn to date. But recognizing again that when we say Des Moines Waterworks has $23 million or so in
Yeah.
obligations, a substantial portion of that is not Des Moines' system. It's our suburban customers who may have cash.
For example, if you want to support asset transfer, you might say that the cash consideration of the waterworks for asset transfer might equal that amount in order to make the deal go, if someone was willing to pay. I think the problem is there's been no demonstrated willingness on the part of those who wish to receive the transfer to pay for the transfer.
All right, I'm back on my game now. I got
Good.
it.
If you think of something else, let us know. So the Greater Des Moines Botanical
I
Garden
have
Board.
nothing to report there. I'll go to a meeting in August.
Good. Des Moines Waterworks Park Foundation Board, Dave, do you have any kind of an update, or?
Well, I think that Graham made some suggestions on some changes maybe we should make for the performances or to our bylaws. Are we gonna talk about that this board meeting, or? is it-
Oh, for you're talking about the
Event
special
management,
events.
event
Yeah.
management.
Well, yeah, and there's a document that's been distributed, people are supposed to make edits on that, and then it's set
By
for the
August
agenda.
1st.
It would be on the August agenda.
Uh-huh.
There would be a
And
discussion on it.
I think it's been kind of, maybe, at least my opinion from hearing the discussion, I think it was maybe a tempest in a teapot. I think we really have pretty good safeguards and governance, and we've got a really good group. They were basically doing what they were doing because somebody had brought them some things up, and they were doing their due diligence. They looked at it, and it was a unanimous vote against the change in usage of the park, however you might want to say it. But I think that, other than having a meeting and going over what we're doing, and they are really successful. They are really doing a good job. About the only thing that was discussed that was anything controversial at all was that subject. And I think it's really, we should leave, in my opinion, and maybe it's not the time to say it, but I think we just leave it like it is. I think it's functioning perfectly well.
Dave, can I
Yeah.
latch onto that for a minute, just to
Yeah.
make sure that the board is on? I think some
Maybe
members
you
of the
can
board are gonna
clarify
be.
what I'm saying.
The events management RFP, responses, came back, and the Des Moines Waterworks Park Foundation chose, for lack of a better word, the non-Live Nation option, which is what People's Productions and First Fleet Concerts, which is a more local, pared down series of planned events. And I think that Graham has requested comments back from you on the suggested rules and regulations changes after that August 1 date. I'll certainly be communicating with Graham on where we want to go, where you all as a board want to go on that, with a little bit of a staff perspective. So happy to.
And the purpose of that, Dave, in my view, is to put into writing policy that allows that clearly allows the foundation to do exactly what they're doing today. And that is to, if they should choose to hire an event planner or what have you, that is perfectly within their mission, so that there is not confusion down the road. Once we're all off this board, once the foundation members have changed over, that there's a clear path forward for how decisions are made, and it kind of puts into writing what the vision is, what the shared vision is between the foundation board as it is today and this board as it is today, for how and what types of events are there. And so that, again, to restate, the purpose of that policy is to make it very clear to this board, to the foundation board, and to the public how the decision process for events would handle. I think Sam was the one that said it best, that the foundation, I may step over this, but that the foundation's goal is to, improve the park to allow the occasional concert, as opposed to build a concert venue that allows some park activities. And I think he said it better than me, but that is clearly what the foundation's goals have been, and I think we all support. And so this policy just puts that in writing, so that this board and future boards know where to go.
I probably jumped the gun. We'll do it in August, but we have some other agreements that I think we're pretty well covered. But let's.
Can I touch on a couple, David? And I
Yeah.
don't know now whether it's the appropriate time or waiting until my report, but for your benefits and kind of bringing you up to date on some of the construction work that's out here.
Oh, yeah.
First of all, I would invite you at the end of the meetings that we're gonna have, if you wanna go up to the platform right behind us, halfway up the stairs, pretty good panoramic view of what's happening to the north. If you just take half of a flight of stairs up here, you'll catch it. There's certainly been a number of issues that have come up, as is not unusual in a complex construction project like this. You can, as an example, now go, I think you can reasonably vision what's going to happen if vision as a verb, I'm not sure works, but I'll try it. I sound like Alexander Haig. If you go down, and I know you've got a picture with you
I
and
do.
Alexander Haig. If you go down Fleur Drive to the south, you can now see where the underpass is developing over here. We're obviously doing site work on our side, nothing happening on the other side, but you can pretty clearly see what's happening. A lot of earthwork, as you probably have seen in just going around the perimeter road, but you can really see it from a better elevation out here, as well as a significant project involving our water main, our 20-inch PVC water main that's going in as part of this project. But through, and I'm sure you have also encountered this through kind of some of the visuals here, we're getting, how would I put it, a number of people in the public who are weighing in after the fact about their views on the appropriateness of this project. I think all of us have had some of that, but I think from the staff perspective so far, certainly if Michael or Ted or others can weigh in. I think we're pleased by the general contractor and their coordination with us, the work that's going on. We all were very relieved that during the last flooding event just a few weeks ago, that even though they relocated out here, that area itself wasn't touched by any of the flood water. So there are a lot of good things happening. I think the foundation board is actually looking at putting a time-lapse camera out here, so there would be a longitudinal, high-speed look at those construction efforts. I don't know if you've ever seen one of those. Mid-American has some great footage from some of their wind mill, their generation projects that are pretty interesting to watch. I think the foundation is looking at it here also. So from a staff perspective, and Michael or Ted, I think we're very pleased about the work that's happening to date. Some of our customers and motorists on Fleur Drive disagree with us a little bit on the severity of some of the earthwork that's going on. But Ted, anything you want to add?
Just great interest from the employees. You know, people are very intrigued by what's going on, and kind of excited and generally positive. The one thing I would add to your comments.
Michael, you've been.
No additions today.
Okay. I do want to just go back to this proposed change in the board policy. In your mail, you will see that on July 12th, Michelle sent it out to all of us. And Dave, to your point, when you said, I think we're okay the way it is, I just want to make sure everyone has a chance to get feedback to Graham by August 1st. Our previous policy was a 3-sentence policy. This is a page and a half. So we are talking about wrapping some additional oversight around it. And I think that's the reason that we wanted everyone to have a chance to review it.
And
So-
what it does, and just to add on to this
Sure.
too, my hope is that what it does is it incorporates the language from the 28E between the two organizations, and so that it doesn't alter or attempt to alter the 28E at all. All it does is make it part of our policy, so that our policy doesn't conflict with the 28E, that it's consistent with it. And so whether you're a board member and you're looking at the policy manual and figuring out how to make the decision, or you're a member of the foundation, or one of our board members looking at the 28E, it's all the same.
Right.
And so that's why I think it's important that we do something when it comes to changing the policy, whether it's the language I sent out or something.
You know, this had been Graham's concern. He worked on the 28E, but then did not see that consistent in the policy. And just as an example, I'll draw your attention to item 5. We had a lot of discussion about what comes before this board. Well, he's pretty clearly outlined here that for organized activities of more than 1,000 people, now I know it's going to be sometimes hard to estimate that, but originally we had said we really don't want every single event coming before the board, or do we? And so
And
those are the
further,
kinds-
after Ted's suggestion, that, you know, there may be times where there's an event over 1,000 people, like a walk or something that doesn't create a lot of sound or interference in the neighborhood around, that wouldn't come to us necessarily either. Really, the only thing that's being raised there is that for a big event, that's gonna cause a lot of noise or disruption in the community, that comes to this board, so the board's aware of it and participates in that decision-making process. That's the only reason that that's there.
Okay.
And I would think with big events, that they know how many planned tickets they need to.
Sure.
We have a history of drawing those lines, whether it's 1,000 or something else, so the number doesn't bother us from staff. Did the circulation of this contemplate staff comment also, Graham, or how do you want to handle that?
Absolutely.
I will only introduce one now, just for your consideration, and that's the idea of putting it in your rules and regs. I have some concern about doing that. The rules and regs, I think, are, pardon the metaphor, but like a constitution. I don't think you should amend it a whole lot. As an example, every time you have a 2080, if you have a new 2080 for phase 2 here, it's gonna come back and have to change the rules and regs. And I have some concern about that, but nonetheless, that'll be the kind of comment that I think you hear from staff.
And I think, and that's a very valid point, and we've actually, you raised that before, and one thing that, I think is, as we look at, as I say, as Sue points out, the policy probably needs to be changed regardless of whether we change that and put some of this language in another place, just so that it's consistent. One of the things I tried to do was to address, that section of the policy addresses the parks, which would include Maffett Lake and would, and this property at Waterworks Park, so that, again, there's some consistency there, but not to get to the part of the weeds, I think that's a fair thing to discuss.
Got it, thank you.
So, Counselor, I'm gonna put you on the spot twice in one board meeting, how about that? As part of our policy manual, to make a change, does that have to originally be read and then approved at the next meeting, or could it be approved with whatever changes we have at the August meeting?
I think it could be done in one meeting. There's no
Okay.
reading and then going to the next meeting required for the amendment.
Sounds
You'll just, and I certainly agree with Rick, you'll remember that we do make rules and regs changes with some frequency, particularly in the distribution area, where we're making some technical changes and the kinds of things that developers and engineers look at, and it's done in a single meeting, as I recall. I think David has raised some concerns in the past, whether that makes good policy sense, but that's not to say that you're unable to do it. I think David was looking for notice on some of the issues involving backflow prevention, as I recall, David, so.
We have
Okay.
two different kinds of rules. We have the customer service rules that govern water service, and then we have the board policy manual, which is more a matter of what the board's processes, procedures, and policies are going to be, and this is the latter.
I was curious, how do you, and that's what I was looking to find when I said that we had how do you find the agreement that went 2080?
The 2080 will be in materials you have received and approved, David. We can get you another copy of it. What Rick is saying, there's rules and regs and there's board policy manual, both of which are hard copies that, again, we can provide you. But
2080 we approved.
you approved of 2000, you have approved 3 2080s kind of involving this, if you'll recall, so it becomes a little bit complicated.
Because I knew we had
We
that,
can
and
certainly.
I just didn't ever, and
We'll
I've
make a
got
note,
so many
Michelle and I will make a note to make sure that you get a copy of
agreements
it.
on top of agreements.
Well, this
Which
is,
is-
understand, this is not a new agreement. I mean,
Right.
this is purely making sure that our policies reflect the agreements we've entered into.
Yeah, okay, so just to be clear, all edits on this are to be returned to Graham. Feel free to copy Michelle, because I think what we want to do is to then have all of those pulled together for us to entertain at the August board meeting. Okay. All right.
Okay.
Yep, are you okay, Dave?
No, I'm just not a big person on rules and regulations.
Well, you're gonna learn to be real fast. Okay, coming from planning and zoning and everything you used to do, you know,
Well,
you're very good at that.
there's too many.
Okay, moving ahead, I know that we have Laura Sarcone here, our government outreach update. Would you like to share?
Well,
with the
very
board?
briefly, just 2 updates to the memo that was included in your packet. You should be receiving an invitation for Thursday, August 30th Thursday, August 30th at 3 p.m. at the Riverwalk Hub, and we're calling it In the Know About Your H2O community event. So please plan to attend that. We are inviting declared candidates, current legislators, city council, boards of supervisors, and a few select business industries as well. So hopefully a good crowd for that event. And then also, I know if you're a planner, you'll want to put this in your calendar. Thursday, February 28th, 2019, we are planning a legislative breakfast at the Capitol. So
Nice.
that will be something that you will also be invited to next year.
And Laura, the only conflict that I do see on the calendar, just as you announced that date,
I got it too.
the government policy
Yeah.
for state meeting.
Uh-huh.
I mean, those are generally attended by about, 20, 25 people, but
Yep.
we may have some overlap.
Yep.
Good, thank you, Laura. Okay, moving ahead, we have our CEO and general manager comments. Bill?
Two quick ones. You'll recall some discussion and concern that at least staff has had about the right-of-way management fee with the city of Des Moines, essentially going from $30,000 to $80,000, and over the next several years going to $500,000. I've had the opportunity to communicate with the city manager's office as well as Jeff Lester, Corporation Counsel, and essentially what we're doing at this point is holding everything in abeyance to the circuit appeal relative to related litigation between CenturyLink and the city of Des Moines on the appropriateness of the right-of-way management fees. So just wanted to give you a bit of an update on that. And then in something that I don't think I've had an opportunity to do before in my tenure here, to throw a laurel at our friends in production, in particular involving the Saylorville Water Treatment Plant. Last week, running through the weekend, we were able to make and sustain nearly 10 million gallons of water production at that facility, 10 and then 9 essentially, and then in the 8s. What are we doing today, Kyle? Do you know?
Probably close to 8 again.
So, given our history at that facility, we're pleased by that outcome. We'll continue to push the boundaries. We have RO units coming in and to be installed next year. Is that correct?
Later this year.
Later this year, the last quarter of this year.
Right.
So we continue to look at the importance of the Saylorville Water Treatment Plant in our larger portfolio of assets, but recognizing we've hit our heads several times in Saylorville production. We cleared the beam, if you will, to get to 10 MGD in the last week. So thanks to our water production staff and Kyle's leadership of that group.
I have a question, and I was gonna ask you this, and then I thought maybe others would like to hear it, and forgive me, because I think I should know the answer. Would you remind me where we are on, when we turn on the denitrification units, the effluent that comes out of those units, we were gonna return.
Correct.
Build
The
a
discharge into
the
a sanitary sewer system. We continue to work. We've had some difficulties with river crossing, if you will. We've had some permitting issues. We have not denitrified with the ionization unit this year, so it really isn't a situation where we've discharged into the river. At the same time, we're trying to construct a sanitary sewer connection. It will probably now be later this fall, Michael, we're hoping.
There's been some recent conversations with the contractor and their subs and the material supplier. I would say that fall completion is very likely.
But
The completion of the connection?
correct.
Correct. Pump station and
The connection.
force main still need a little bit more work.
The filter to the west, immediately to the west of the existing filter building here at Fleur Drive now, there's been a pump station that's been constructed. I think we've had some difficulty in finding the right timing for the pump installation and synchronization, and then some connection issues. Even though we say fall of this year, I must say, I think I've represented to you several different
Well,
times, none of which
I
have been
understand
met
it's
yet.
complicated.
I think it's, well, yeah, either that or I'm just not able to resolve the complication effectively, I believe that I initially had represented to you that by a year ago, that construction would be completed. So we keep pushing it back, but hopefully this time, we'll get there. I'm sure Michael is
You just
just
verified.
delighted that I just represented that.
But remind me, okay, so the pipe comes out here at the nitrification unit, and it connects about where?
Way up by the arts center, or the old
What
art
street
store,
is that,
so
Ted?
high.
Oh, so
High,
it goes up.
MLK
Yeah, and actually,
High.
if you go up MLK today, over by where the old art store was at
It's a bank
MLK,
now,
and it is a bank now, at MLK and High, and on that same side of the road, there are still two open facilities there that I'm confident are related to our connection. So the next time you go up there, a gateway or whatever, and look across the road, you'll see four, on each side of the road, four fence stakes and some taped areas that there's still open holes on the northwest and southwest corner of High and MLK.
So I didn't know the answer, so I'm glad I asked. It's helpful. Thank you.
Anything else, Bill?
No?
Dave?
Yeah, Bill, I was wondering, is this, this is the place to ask about our planning committee? I have a couple subjects.
Oh, excellent. We've had some discussion, and refresh my recollection on what we were looking at for our planning committee agenda. Do you remember off the top of your head?
Northwest Sixth Drive washout.
Flood-related issues. Yeah, flood-related issues. Go ahead, David. What do
Okay,
you have that you
a
want to put
couple.
on?
One won't be a surprise.
Okay.
I'd like to have an update on our diversity successes or not
Sure,
successes.
Doug is delighted.
And maybe even tying into that, but not the major part of it, is what we're doing to train our people to move up the ladder, our staff training, you know, to advance for your job, somebody that comes in here.
Continuing education
Yeah.
type of thing?
Yeah, okay.
And then if we could.
We'll give you a training summary, if you will, David.
Okay, and then if we could go, have somebody go back a little bit and just a light touch on the development of the crabapple plans and the, you know, the arboretum, how it was planned and how it was to look and everything. And then how what's there is of it now and the inventory we have. So that I guess the thing I'd like to look at is we've got this collection and maybe we want to display it a little better. Now that we're doing things, it may be something the Park Foundation would want to find a donor to. I assume at one time there was the trees were laid out and you could go around and look at the different varieties. And then we just kind of overplanted and turned it, it's just my opinion, but turned it more into an apple orchard.
And I want to
Without-
make sure that I
without
understand.
spaces.
I want to make sure, Dave, I have an understanding of what you're looking for from us, because I would assume that.
I wonder if there are any old plans of how it was laid out with like lines of sight, with views, with, if the trees were ever put in there for the appearance or anything.
We can give you kind of a history of.
How they were planted and how they were.
Here,
developed.
rather than out at Maffett.
Yeah, yeah, here.
As you know, both, okay, we can certainly do that here, whether we're able to do it between now and,
No, there's no big rush.
well, your scheduled meeting
The
is,
7th.
It doesn't need to be the next
yeah,
meeting.
we'll work on that, Dave.
Mhm.
Excellent.
Just so we can get a little feel of what we have in our collection.
But from my vantage, and Ted, you can certainly correct me if you have a different view of this, if there are issues on the educational aspects of our historic crabtree interest, I would assume that the foundation and their educational outreach and planning would be the appropriate vessel of that rather than us. Ted, you may have a different view of that.
Well, I think we may be able to investigate the vision of the original Arboretum and some of that historical thing. Going forward, I definitely think it would be something that we would want to look at.
More in the foundations, I
Yeah.
believe it'd be more in the
Well,
foundations,
that's what I was thinking in the
line
future,
of sight
but just
than us.
to kind
Fine.
of refresh us
Gotcha.
what there is there to work with.
Well, and I know, Dave, at one point you had mentioned to me, and this kind of ties to this, I think there are some unique species
Mhm.
of trees, and you had expressed to me that you were hoping that we would maintain some of those, or wondered if there would be any that would be transferred or that we would be able to ensure that we have going forward, just kind of the overall plan, I think
Yeah,
is what you
what we
mentioned.
have there, and it's one of the best collections I understand.
Of various things.
Refresh my recollection, Ted, I do not believe any of the crabs were transplanted in this process. There would be a number of those historically relevant crabs that have been removed, and we want to, we want to be clear that we don't get in some kind of cross purpose between what we've articulated to the public in terms of removal of 100+ trees and now an effort kind of backwards to look at the crab apples as being off limits from future master planning involving the arboretum.
I just mean that we have kept our species, because we plant some and some of them die, and.
I'm not sure we have kept some of the species is my response, I guess.
Okay.
So we'll
I
give you a
don't know.
historic look. We've done a tree inventory that'll give you,
Yeah.
very detailed information about what is rare and in what condition. But we're, relatively far past the idea that there are species out here that should not be removed. They probably have been removed.
Okay, with that, we don't do this very often, but we will adjourn this meeting and then we will reopen under the Board of Waterworks trustees for our pension plan. All of us also serve as trustees for the pension, so with that, I'll ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And do you need to restart it, Michelle? We can keep going. So now we would like to convene the meeting of the Board of Waterworks trustees. As trustees of the Des Moines Waterworks Pension Plan, it's July 24th. And first item is to approve the minutes of our meeting last year, July 25th, 2017. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And then before you have the 2017 pension plan audit. Bill?
And if I may, Rick, this is a question for you, excuse me, for
Good
taking
question.
the board's time on this issue, which I should have caught before. Is it appropriate, Rick, to change the agenda, to put the public comments before their action on pension plan? It's kind of awkward, in my view, that we're asking for comments after they take action here.
I think it could be done either way, but it's certainly appropriate to ask for comments now.
And perhaps it's a moot issue because the people who would be most likely to comment on this, the representatives from our AFSCME represented employees, I've had a number of discussions, and they're certainly confident in the actions you're going to take today, so they felt no need to be here to make comments, but maybe we'll just change it in the future. I would think we're better off in the future to have the public comment first. I doubt there'll be any public comment one way or another.
Okay.
So if I may then go into, I guess, item 2, the pension plan audit. You'll recall from discussions at Finance and Audit from Andrew Steckel from RSM that there are essentially 2 reports. You have it in one hard form in front of you, but also in the materials that you've either been sent electronically or have hard copies that include a Des Moines Waterworks Pension Plan financial report and a Des Moines Waterworks Pension Plan report to the Board of Directors. All of these indicate that they're unqualified or a clean opinion on our Des Moines Waterworks pensions. I would point out to you one detail that I think is important in my discussions with our representative and in fact with our unrepresented employees, and that's the so-called ADC, the actuarially determined contribution that is set for this next year at 1.23 million. Last year that was 1.02, as I recall, or something near that. There have been certain assumptions that have been made by our actuarians, and our auditors have reviewed that essentially are reducing the rate of return from 6.25, as I recall, to 6%. And because of that, and looking at the plan requirements or plan estimates, have moved the ADC to $1.236 million. Again, in my discussions with our AFSCME representatives, as well as with a number of non-represented employees, I think they are very comfortable with this board's handling of pension issues, particularly in the last several years, and the aggressiveness of funding it at levels like that we are going to move forward with, given your actions here in keeping the plan not only solvent but healthy. Happy to answer any questions. Peggy and I would be happy to answer any questions you might have.
If we do have questions, let's first get a motion on the table to receive and file the 2017 pension plan financial audit report. So moved. Second? Okay, any discussion or questions for Peggy or Bill? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And opposed? Moving ahead, we have the pension plan actuarial valuation.
Peggy was polite enough not to say I just bled both those issues together,
That's all
but
right. That's okay.
here we go. This is where the ACD is, the actuarially determined contribution for the future of $1.236 million. Again, we'd be happy to answer any questions you may have on this issue, but our thanks as employees, represented and non-represented, for your commitment to appropriately fund the Des Moines Water Works pension in the future and for the next year.
And Bill, are we?
That's a receive and file. I
Another
assume.
receive and file.
Yeah, it's a receive and file the pension plan.
So I'm looking for a
actuarial
motion
valuation.
to receive and file the pension plan actuarial valuation.
So moved.
Second? All in favor? Opposed? And our strangely placed public comment period now at the end. Do we have any questions? I'm hearing we do not. With that, I will call for a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Second? All in favor? Aye. Thank you.
On your toes today?